Welcome back to Hardtech People. I'm Danielle Applestone, a serial hardtech entrepreneur, and I help early stage hardtech companies get the people side of their businesses right. Today, I'm joined by Aimee Rose, a scientist turned tech executive who spent 6 years at Activate as executive managing director. Aimee has spent her career bridging the gap between the lab and the market, and she's helped hundreds of deep tech founders figure out how and when to bring on their first commercial person and how to cover that function without one. So today we're going to dig in on how to know when you need a commercial hire, how to find them, and how to help them really become part of the team. Welcome to the show, Aimee.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to see you, Danielle.
Thanks. So let's first kind of define it. So
Yes,
for
that's a great idea.
for early hard tech founders, what does commercial actually mean?
I'll start by saying what it's not. It's definitely not a salesperson. You don't have a SKU. You're not building standard products yet. You are basically navigating one of a kind, first of a kind agreements across potentially like your whole supply chain. So, what's coming in and what's going out. I think a quick way to summarize it is to say that, this person's responsible for first of a kind one-off deals, can be across the organizational function. So it can be things like licensing IP, finding vendors that maybe need to make something custom for you. But if you put it in that category of bespoke deals, you'll find the CEO ends up spending a lot of time on these type of arrangements and agreements early on.
Hmm. Let's talk about what's the advantage to bringing someone in from the outside that's maybe not part of the co-founding team.
I think founders will often, especially like maybe either just pre or just post Series A, get a lot of pressure from their board to bring on like experienced help, right? Who's the person around the room that's done this before or built similar things. I think from a company building perspective, the right phenotype of person in that role with the right experience set and the right mindset for a startup can be successful in bringing to the table their experience negotiating and navigating a lot of these deals, running a tight process to get to a conclusion for those deals. And in particular, sort of their Rolodex and industry connections that are going to help open doors for potential opportunities and initial sales for the company.
Hmm. One thing that I have seen those external commercial hires bring to the table is also experience with how contracts are
Yeah,
structured, especially for industrial energy storage or something like that, where you're bringing together different sources of capital to make the project happen, and then you have different either licensing or cost share agreements. Those can be pretty complicated and not a thing that a founder would normally have come across.
100%. And, this person is part lawyer. I mean, you definitely bring in legal help because they are complex and binding in some cases.
Hmm.
But this person can understand at a first pass, like, what are the obligations that we're setting forth? What's the value we're creating with this agreement? All of those kind of things. And think creatively too on deal structure. I think, it's easy to use some blunt tools and end up, not creating the most value for both sides of the table. And so, what are the
Hmm.
creative deal structures that they've experienced or could build here so that both parties are set up for the best level of success?
Hmm. You mentioned phenotype, so I'd like to dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah.
What are the qualifications or characteristics that you might find in a BD or commercial leader that's going to be a good fit for an early stage hard tech company?
It's really hard. I honestly, statistically, I don't have data on this, so I don't want to say, but there's a high probability of failure if you're pulling somebody in from big industry that has worked in large companies their whole career. They're going
Hmm.
to have the perfect qualifications because they know the customer, they know the industry, all of those things. But the transition for these folks to, well, one is selling kind of immature technology, right? You're not
Hmm.
there yet. This is first of a kind. Two is just all the constant changing of priorities that startups have to navigate as they're like evolving towards their first markets. And if you've been an executive at a large company for a long time, you're used to a lot of people just pulling on your time. And
Mm-hmm.
you need to get very much into like push mode, which is like chasing down opportunities, running a process. And that just takes a different sort of mentality and mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very risky hire, is what I'll say. And the other downside is, of course, it takes like 6 to 9 months to figure out if there's a fit there, because these are long, typically really long um, cycles of working with potential customers.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes a long time to figure out if this person is the right fit. Obviously, like there's these kind of unicorns that have done it in 3 or 4 startups, and actually that is where they operate the best.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody with like what I would say a strategy or product orientation. So somebody
Hmm.
who's been on the product side of things. So basically you're balancing what the technology can do and what the customer wants, and somebody that can integrate those two things strategically to help inform the product specs that are going to be built and understand from the customer side and the technical team side what people want and what's possible is really important. Um, and technical fluency is also very important. So this person doesn't need to be a PhD. They don't need to be an expert in your field, but they should be able to speak at a reasonably deep level about the technology. And because a lot of these discussions end up being highly technical discussions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm kind of sensing a few different categories just to summarize. One is this thread of creativity, being creative with these early deals for a technology that hasn't come to market, being creative about what this technology might do to solve that potential customer's problems, and then also creatively getting your needs met, because if you've come from a larger company and now you're at a startup, there's just not the same resources. You don't have a team of 10
Exactly.
to work with. And so getting creative about how to get the work done, even though you're pretty resource constrained, seems important. So, in addition to that big swath of things you got to be creative about, bringing together the expertise of I know this industry, and then also the Rolodex of I'm well networked,
A
seems
unicorn.
like yeah, seems like a unicorn.
It really is. You'll never get all those things, right? It's like, what would the perfect person look like, and how close
Mm-hmm.
can I get to that? And also, like, how do I set them up for success once they join?
Yeah. Out of those, what do you think is the most critical? The like must have.
Some demonstration of ability to operate in an entrepreneurial environment has been the major sort of failure point I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
And so that doesn't necessarily need to be startup experience, but it can be building a new business unit or working in a special projects unit. Some example of where they've functioned and delivered in a resource constrained environment.
Yeah, if I had to pick just one, I would pick someone who had made the first multi-million dollar deal with a technology that had never been sold before. Like
Yep.
if you can find a person, regardless of industry,
Yep.
regardless of where they've been, if they got a thing to be sold for the first time ever, that to me is it's kind of the encompassing of all of the little skills. Like they're a
Yep.
hunter mentality. They can get things done. They can be creative enough to get somebody to sign on the dotted line.
Yep. Totally agree.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about say you are evaluating someone and they have some of
So
these.
hard.
How how do you tell good from great, or how do you find the great within the good when it comes to someone who's got this business development experience?
I think you hit the nail on the head about like having the right list of must-haves, should-haves, and nice-to-haves, and being pretty strict about that, or revisiting that list and reprioritizing them over time. It's a really hard hire because it's one of the first hires that will be likely outside of the founder's expertise. So they've never done the job themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you evaluate how good someone is at that job? And so I believe in, and I'm definitely want to hear how you would approach this as well, Danielle, because you're more of an expert. But I believe in like really deep, long interviews, understanding all the things this person has done. And with business development, there are very specific things that you can ask somebody to walk you through.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning like, what's the deal that you're most proud of? Like you're talking about that first of a kind million deal. What's the deal that you're most proud of? How have you gotten a deal unstuck? Um, Asking them to read one of your company's patents and like explain it back to you to understand like how well they would communicate with customers.
Mm-hmm.
Ask them to build, some level of strategy around how they would approach selling this thing. I believe that like C-level hires, VP level hires should deliver some type of like organizational recommendations as after, they've had enough exposure to what's going on and what's being built, because you want to see how that person thinks and you want to see how that person collaborates and brainstorms with the team.
Mm-hmm. I try to understand roles in terms of their ingredients. So if I'm not familiar with, say, a business development role, I'd probably do a bunch of research on like what are the fundamental functions that that person needs to do. Like they need to be good at relationships. They need to be good at communicating a highly technical thing to a non-technical audience. They need to be persistent. They need to have this creativity around deals and then work backwards from that on, okay, so what is something they've done in their past that has demonstrated like just how good or great they are at developing those
Hmm.
relationships? Just how good or great are they at communicating a technical product to a non-technical audience? Say you have to work with a utility or something like that, and those people are super technical, but it's a different realm probably than whatever technology you're trying to interface with their grid. So I would go kind of granular, kind of elemental, and then work backwards and think about what kind of questions could I ask and what would make for an exceptional answer. What's an answer that might even surprise me in each of those categories?
Yeah, it's also a good place to leverage your board and advisors because
Mm-hmm.
very likely those folks do have experience interviewing these people. And so getting second and third, fourth opinions on stuff matters a lot.
Yeah, completely. If you are lucky enough to have an advisor or even an independent board member that has some
Hmm.
commercial experience in the area, definitely involve them in the interview process. But let's talk about kind of a maybe like a downside to that. One is I see, especially like when people are under pressure from investors to hire like a big name
Yep.
person who looks great on paper. Like how do you navigate the situation when someone looks great on paper but isn't the right fit for you and your values and how you want to function and the culture that you want to build?
That's just really, really hard. I don't have a magic answer to it besides, filtering for culture fit and entrepreneurial acumen early can be helpful because then
Mm-hmm.
you're not, bringing these candidates to your board. The board might be bringing candidates to you, and that
Mm-hmm.
puts it in a more difficult, puts you in a more difficult situation. I think that, you know, at the end of the day, having like the strongest argument about why and who and having, a top candidate to present to them can be helpful in assuaging any concerns.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, counter examples of where, other founders may have struggled and brought on the wrong person and the impact that ends up costing the business because of the time it takes to realize it's not a fit and then act on it. You definitely
Yeah.
don't want to transfer these relationships that this person is building, meaning you don't want to hire somebody that's going to be gone in 6 months, because there
Mm-hmm.
becomes a loss of momentum and even a potential loss of credibility. Um,
Completely. Yeah.
yeah.
I often think about the process as it's fit first. Like you have to be aligned with the values and the culture of the company. But if you haven't put those things into words yet as a founder, I would. I would put them into words. I would say, this is what we are looking for. This is why this value is extremely important to the success of our particular business, and align with the board before anyone even comes to the door, before any
Mm-hmm.
conversations have happened, because then you're not being skewed by something shiny who, someone shiny who wants to join the team, and everybody feels, oh wow, someone from that company with that pedigree wants to join as our first commercial leader. People can kind of get really, I don't know, enamored by that. And if you have not taken the time to properly align people on, these are our criteria, these are our behavioral and values and culture criteria first, and why, and get everybody to say yes and thumbs up to that, then it's a lot harder to say no to someone who is on paper like very compelling, but who would be a disaster to join your leadership team. I think that the only way to make those arguments is to make them early, actually pre-make all of the arguments that you're then going to lean on when someone walks through the door who's a good experience fit, but not a good culture fit.
100%. Like it's about the board approving the process is
Mm-hmm.
basically what you're saying, like pre-approving the process and then respecting the process, and getting alignment on the process.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about what happens when you do make a hire and you do bring on that BD person. How do you hold someone accountable when you don't have experience in their realm?
Hmm. You can take, your org level goals and like create derivative milestones that are business development related, right? And so, if it's a certain amount of, revenue pipeline or a certain like cost savings on your input materials, like those kind of things, like you can
Mm-hmm.
take a step from there. And the early milestones can be around pipeline building, about relationship building, those kind of things, because, ideally this person is out creating relationships and opportunities before you're ready to deploy or scale. And what are the early indicators that would end up being like a closed JDA or partnership agreement?
Mm-hmm. I do always try to put some sort of tangible, quantitative goal in there as well, something that I want to see, because if if I think a thing should be done already and they're like, no, in our industry, it's really customary for it to take 9 months or 12 months for this thing to happen, I'm not going to know, right? If I'm not going to know if they are bullshitting me or not. But if I know that working backwards from my goals, I need to have X things signed by this date, and I've got some buffer in there. If they are not making tangible progress towards that kind of numerical thing that's very concrete that I need, then I can maybe make a change before that deadline. But I I kind of caution people not only just to have the relationship building, because that's a little bit squishy as goals, but have something that you can point to at the end of 6 months or 9, 12 months and say they did make this concrete contribution. Because I think a lot of business development is just talking and building relationships, and it's really hard to measure if someone's being successful in the role or not.
It's a really good point to just add, like, anytime a founder is hiring outside of their expertise, like front loading a really comprehensive, like, what does success look like in this role in like the first 6 months, first year, that kind of thing. And just even aligning on making sure these candidates understand it, as well, I think is really, really important. And I agree, there's plenty of leading indicators, starting with number of NDAs or number of JDA,
Mm-hmm.
discussions.
Yeah, the quantity and the speed of things that are happening. Like you said, I like the sort of meetings that required an NDA. I think that
Yeah.
that's one that is commonly used, which I think is helpful, because it does indicate like, okay, we're talking about something serious. We're not just having the preliminary conversation, but we've got more like decision makers in the room and we're having a serious conversation, that can be something more significant.
Yep.
Hmm. Another area I think about is how to integrate this commercial hire into what is typically a highly technical, engineering
Yeah.
focused company and team. How do you think about integrating this person into the group?
I think one, this person's learning a lot from the market, and so there needs to be structured ways for them to report back to the technical team. So
Hmm.
really having them in road mapping meetings, product kind of a pipeline decision making meetings, and having their contributions. That's why I was saying earlier, kind of this person is probably a product person in the earliest parts of their contributions to the company. Like, this is
Hmm.
what we're learning, this is what we're going to need to build, and integrating their voice and their learning cycles into the top line, again, decisions the company is making, technical decisions the company is making, and therefore like technical goals that the company has is really, really important.
Hmm. How often do you see someone from the product side becoming the commercial leader?
So it depends what you mean by products. Like, a true product person, I absolutely think like can do this job. Have they been a product manager or something along those lines in a comparable industry and a
Hmm.
comparable organization? I think in general, those people are really strong at really integrating, I know enough about what the technology can do. I know what the market can do. Um, how do I, you know, align the organization towards the best spec and features that we can build based on those constraints?
Hmm.
I think promoting somebody from if you have a really strong product manager and you want to promote them from the organization into this role, you want to make sure that you're resourcing them properly.
Hmm. Have you seen people contract with this role first before making a full-time hire? Because you mentioned something about the relationships, right? You don't want them to be building the relationships for 6 months and then be moving on. But have you seen a configuration where contracting makes sense?
I have in a few situations. One is like maybe somebody internally who's more junior has been taking on some of this responsibility,
Hmm.
right? And by junior, I mean they might be a co-founder, right? But they are maybe a recently graduated MBA, for
Hmm.
example.
Hmm.
Um, and bringing in a really like connected and experienced consultant to support that person can be a way to try to bridge the gap between when you might need a full-time, very experienced person in this role and kind of what the company needs right now as we're learning about the market and spiraling towards the best product that, we're going to build.
Hmm.
So I've seen that be very effective if it's, the right relationship and the right person internally to continue to learn and drive and like learn from this person.
Hmm.
Um, and then in general, if you're just looking for somebody to make introductions for you, you could rent somebody's Rolodex, right? Especially
Hmm.
again in the earlier stages where you're more exploring the markets than having made definitive decisions on the market.
Yeah. I have favored that approach of having someone at the company who is well equipped with perhaps an advisor and then also a
Hmm.
person who has the network. It's a way of maintaining the relationships such that if a commercial leader comes and goes, you still have an anchor for those relationships with these very important potential customers.
100%.
So to close us out, I'm wondering what's the first step that you would take if you are a CEO who's thinking about bringing on a BD resource to your company?
Assuming as a CEO, the first step I would take is to backtrack the milestones that I have committed to and am expecting to get to, and backtrack, the time it takes to build a pipeline, the balancing that with the pipeline I've already been building as CEO and the time it takes deals to close and the time it takes to hire someone and
Mm-hmm.
backtracking all of those things. But I really like the concept also that kind of bubbled up through this conversation about being rigorous around what success in this role looks like for the first 6 to 9 months and
Mm-hmm.
what's measurable about that and really thinking through those things and getting advice and feedback on those things because that will help you insert, this type of hire at the right moment in the company. You don't want to be too immature that there's, really nothing to talk about yet, but most of these relationships take a long time to build and to close. And so you don't also want to be scrambling to insert someone into the process very, very late.
Yeah, completely. Okay. Well, I'm sure we could talk about this topic for another several hours, but I'd love to tie it out and just say thank you for sharing all of your insights on this topic.
Thanks. Great conversation, Danielle.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, everybody, that's it for today's episode of Hardtech People. And if you're wrestling with when or how to make your first commercial hire, or you just want to talk through how to build your team intentionally as you grow, I'd love to help. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn for People Ops consulting or hiring support, and also send in your questions for future episodes. Thanks so much for listening, and if you enjoyed this conversation, please follow, rate, and share the show. See you next time.